Hello my friends and welcome back to another interview here on Flutter Explained. Today we have the honor to speak with Luke Pighetti. Luke Pighetti is one of the well-known software developers here in the Flutter community. Luke has a very inspiring Flutter story that he has to tell, and he took his time to share that story with us. Do not miss the opportunity and stay till the end of the video. And now, if I already convinced you with that short intro that this video will be great, please consider to give that video a like and subscribe to that channel so that motivates us to create better content for you. And now, without further ado, let's get right into the interview. Thank you for joining us today, Luke.
Thank you. Feeling good. I'm well hydrated.
Well hydrated. That is very important these days. I think it's very hot. So Luke, could you tell me something about yourself? Who are you?
Well, my name's Luke Pighetti. I work for a small mobile web and backend agency its name is TheYakka. We are primarily a mobile app agency. We do Flutter for all of our mobile stuff, and we also do Vue for our web front end stuff, and then we use Golang for all of our back end. We have a very long history of working with Flutter all the way back to pre-alpha stages. Not me personally, but the other major Flutter developer that works and is the owner of TheYakka. In my spare time, I am a woodworker. I've been a lot of things. I've painted houses. I graduated from university with a mechanical engineering degree. I have run a audiophile headphone company out of my garage where I designed and built all of the machine tooling to produce audiophile headphones and did the design of those products as well. Pretty much got started in software officially when I launched a cryptocurrency altcoin kind of by mistake and needed to build a lot of the services for that project. And I'm not involved in that project anymore, but after doing that for about a year, we actually needed a cryptocurrency wallet developed. And so that's kind of where I got interested in Flutter. That project never materialized. The actual wallet as a product never materialized, but I got started with Flutter and I spent a long time getting up to speed on Flutter development. And now I'm here pretty much. And I can't remember exactly when that was, but I think it was like two and a half years ago.
So you came from that blockchain and you directly was interested in Flutter? Or
me personally, I'm general design and product oriented, right? But I've always designed and built my own products. You can look back at the headphone stuff for that because I was a one-man shop. I needed machine tools, so I built a CNC router, right? I needed process for building the headphones, so I built the process, and all that. A lot of that stuff was born out of just my own personal interest, but also my mechanical engineering degree. If you ever met electrical engineers or mechanical engineers, they believe that they can do anything, probably to a fault, right?
Yes.
And so that's kind of like where I sit in terms of doing stuff. I always pick things based on the results they will provide. And so that's how I ended up working with Flutter, not because I had any particular interest in Flutter, just because it felt like it had the most leverage on my existing skills. And so just through the process of working with it, you start to pick up expertise along the way. And if you do something long enough, I'm not saying I'm an expert, but if you do something long enough, then you become an expert. And so that's kind of been my path with Flutter so far.
So could you tell us a bit more about your current projects? What are you developing in Flutter?
Right now, Yakka is working on a project that is essentially social media for students, okay? You can almost say it's like what Facebook originally was, but is no longer, if that makes any sense. And that's a project that we've been contracted to do. That's been kind of interesting because the projects that we did on Flutter previous to that, before a lot of the newer state management systems, like in particular Provider. So Provider came out and became more mainstream kind of between our last big project and this project. So we had an opportunity to kind of take a look at everything again, get like a fresh look, because the Flutter community is moving about as fast as the JavaScript community is in terms of like what's coming out. And I can be a little bit of a curmudgeon. So sometimes I think that stuff is coming out because people want fame more than they actually want to provide like a better solution. But there's a few key players in the Flutter package world, if you will, who are making really quite good stuff. And I think anybody watching this I'm not going to name names, but I think anyone watching this will know exactly who I might be referring to. I don't think it's a secret. So Provider was one of those things where it was kind of like, oh, this is exactly like, trying to remember the name of it, scoped model. It's like, oh, this is like scope model with the basic concept of the scope model with a little extra tweaks and a couple extra features, better dependency management. And so that gave us an opportunity to be like, oh, well, let's kind of look at this thing fresh, because things have changed actually quite a bit in the last couple of months.
So in your work as Flutter engineer, what are you most proud of?
I think what I'm most proud of is just patterns that I've come up with like while working on these projects. The other thing I'm most proud of is just getting rid of the material library from our workflow. We don't use it at all.
All right.
We'll use it for certain things like, okay, you kind of need a scaffold, you know what I mean? But first thing I do with a project is I create a tappable widget. It's basically an inkwell with an easy way to set a border, an easy way to align stuff inside it, something you can actually apply a gradient to, because if anyone knows, like material buttons are like, you can't use gradients, they're not accessible. And I'm like, middle finger, I want a gradient, you know, like I want a gradient, give me a damn gradient. So it's like, so the first thing we do, or I do, is I create a top widget. The next thing I do is I create a set of extensions that have things like extension on a widget nudge. And all that is, it's a transform. So if you need to nudge, I mean, oftentimes you're working with a designer who cares, and you want a designer who cares. Obviously, what's the point of having the designer? They want everything aligned perfectly. So you add the extension on widget for nudging, and then you can lay everything out, and then you can just kind of tweak things little bits to get everything lined up perfectly. You bring in custom icons, something's going to be off 1 or 2 pixels. You can go ahead and nudge it whenever you put it into the thing. So just little things like that. The other thing I do is a little bit extreme, but I'll create a app style class, and I will add a double called padding unit. And for most times, that'll be 16 pixels. And then throughout the rest of the app, I will try to use divisions or multiplications of that padding unit. And it seems like such a small thing, or it seems like a lot of extra work. But what ends up happening is it just inherently puts your entire layout on like a pseudo grid system, because all your paddings will be 16px or 8px or 32px or whatever. It allows you to lay out things in a way that just looks really coherent. Really cohesive is probably a better word. And the other thing I do is I look at the design and I start collecting lengths. Let's say the designer has said that the average icon is 20 pixels. So I add like a P20. And then let's say we have a button, the button's 32 pixels tall. I'll add like a P32. And then we get a larger button that's 48 pixels tall. I'll do like a P48. And I'll keep doing that. And what I do is I build a collection of common lengths, and then I try to reuse those lengths as much as possible. And just like the padding unit situation, you end up with a more cohesive look, because you might end up with like a small, medium, and a large for buttons, and then like a small, medium, and a large for something else. And you can just start to feed them together. And that's a little crazy at first, but what you end up with is kind of set widgets into different slots, right? You end up with maybe like 20 different slots, something from like 128 down to like 4. And you naturally get these slots, and you can start feeding widgets into these different slots in terms of sizing. And then you're not like making the widget the size based on the child plus padding. You're literally like, this is just how tall it is. And then what's inside it might be this tall. And then the padding becomes kind of intrinsic. You know what I mean? And it's a little bit reverse of how people typically do it. When you're just hacking out a project, you just like throw padding around something and then you're done with it. But when you're working on a large project where design fidelity is so critical, then doing something that small can make a big difference, because repetition is one of the best ways to make a design strong, is to just repeat certain concepts over and over again. And those concepts can be something as simple as just the height of something or the padding of something. And you'll see that concept in Bootstrap. I seem to remember had different sizes, like small, medium, large, XL, 2XL, 4XL, so on and so forth. It's just kind of taking that idea, kind of building it out as you go.
You have a lot of insights of Flutter. I mean, 2 years you are working already within Flutter and around Flutter. Do you know some rarely used features that are most people don't know or not aware of, especially if they begin right now with Flutter?
AnnotatedRegion. So AnnotatedRegion is amazing. And I'll just explain to you really quickly what it's used for. So let's say you are on iOS, you open an app, and the system Chrome at the top, the text is black. all right? And the widget under it is also black. You can't see the system Chrome, right? There's no way to see it because they're the same color. And so what AnnotatedRegion does is able to sense when a widget under it is annotated and it can respond. I think that's what's going on, but I've never been able to like reproduce it for any other purposes. So I think what it does is the system Chrome can sense when a widget is under it, if it's an annotated region, and it will apply that system UI overlay style when that widget is under the system Chrome. Where this is nice is let's say you've got a bunch of pages and you're going from like a dark page to a light page to a dark page to a dark page to a light page, and you have no idea what it's going to be. You can annotate that widget with the actual overlay style, and it will apply it when that widget ends up under it. So this solves the problem of making sure that the system Chrome is always visible. What people typically do is they'll try to go ahead and actually apply the system Chrome when they launch the app. Do like system Chrome dot set whatever the UI overlay style is. And they'll try to do that every time like a screen comes on to try to get it to match, but it's super flaky and it doesn't work on the widget level. So that's just one of those things that's like, it's like a little fidelity thing that's not well documented that is super awesome and solves something that just really tends to upset anyone who cares about the design and the UX of their app. And that's usually pretty much any stakeholder who's not a developer. So this is a good like happy maker. This is a make stakeholders happy widget. That's what that is. And it makes me happy too because it's important to me also. But besides that, I think Flutter in general is just like this well of widgets that is a lot of times not well documented. That's getting better, obviously. But you can just go through the API and look through and be like, oh man, I didn't even know that was a real thing. You know, like every day I'm running into something. I'm like, oh, I had no idea you could do that. Which is good and bad. They have the Flutter widget of the week thing, and I'm always like, this should be like widget of the day or like widget of the hour because there's so many of them. It's insane.
Yeah, sure. What are your thoughts about state management?
My thoughts are pretty simple. Basically, you should just use what you know. Like the guy that I work with, his name is also Luke. He's definitely like procedural is better than declarative style. And then some other people are like declarative is the only way. But there's some things that are just a lot easier to do right now, kind of a hybrid of the both. So if you're a more procedural style, then just using set state is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You can write fantastic apps using just set state. And if you're used to a procedural style, you might not run into the same refactoring problems that someone who writes declarative would have using just local widget state. So there are some scenarios where depending on your style, set state might even be better for you for a larger app than other people. It's all in like how you write software. I think the other stuff like true block would be just RxDart using a pattern that Google had specified a couple years ago. I think that's fine. The block packages, which are not true block, in my opinion, are fine. Then Redux, if you were a React web developer and you know how to use Redux and you like it, use Redux. It's fine. If you were a MobX developer, use MobX. It's fine. If you are starting out fresh and you're a new developer, I would say use Provider. Provider is totally fine. Use Provider with change notifier classes. That's the more correct way of saying it, because Provider is more than just the change notifier classes. So use change notifier classes, get them through the tree with Provider. And the nice thing about change notifier classes is that the mental model is almost exactly like the set state mental model for like local widget state. So if you know how to use set state in a local widget, you can take your knowledge and you can use it in a change notifier class. But now this is like above your entire app instead of just being like a single widget. And all of these different methods, they've got pros and cons. I honestly don't know why people care so much about state management, because the truth is if you just learn one of them and you learn it well, then you'll be ahead of the game. You'll be ahead of everyone else who's trying every single state management system and trying to figure out what works for them. The truth is just pick the one that you feel like you know the most and then just use it and build stuff. Everything else is just a waste of time.
That is a very good precise description. I like that.
I know you probably want something fairly juicy. There's one that just came out. It's called States Rebuilder.
Okay.
And I don't know how long it's been out actually. It could be older than I realized, but it's called States Rebuilder. It has pretty much everything you could want. It's got kind of its own way of doing things, but it's got good dependency management. It's got good state management. It's very low on boilerplate. It has some built-in where like switch clauses into how it handles like initial state, loading state, data, and errors. So it's got a lot of the stuff kind of figured out for you. And so I could see a scenario, I haven't spent much time with it, but I can see a scenario where I'm just like, listen, if you want something that makes you use best practices, if you're not interested in rolling your own, like if you're not interested in using change notifiers, provided down the tree with provider, dependency injection, and if you need a service locator, you can use Git. If you don't want to like make all those decisions, you can pick something like States Rebuilder and just learn how to use it and you'll be fine.
Cool.
I guess I'll say you're better off investing than playing the field when it comes to state management. Just pick something that makes sense to you and invest in it. Otherwise, you'll just waste tons of time.
Okay. I would also ask you about animations in Flutter. Do you have some specific insights in animations, or have you created some cool animations?
I actually don't like animations in Flutter. And the only reason I don't like animations in Flutter is because if you've ever like tooled around with Swift UI, the animation library and the animation system there, it just makes Flutter look like a tricycle. But when you compare Flutter to everything else, then I think the animations are good. What I will say is that with Flutter, you can pretty much get away with anything using just animated container. I think for most use cases, animated container is totally fine. You'll run into stuff where you don't want to use it, obviously, but if you just reach for animated container first, then I would say that 99% of the time you're going to get what you're looking for. And it's just so much easier API to use than using like single ticker provider state mix-in classes for you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And instantiating the controllers and all that stuff and setting up your curved animations, and I mean, you can just go on and on and on. So animated container and animated opacity are both two really good ones. One of the widgets that I always make is basically an animated opacity that's wrapped in ignore pointer, I think it's called. And what I do is if opacity is below like 50%, then ignore pointer is ignoring. And if it's above 50%, then you can actually click through. So what that lets you do is you can put all kinds of stuff on screen and have them like in a stack or whatever, and then just be like, is it visible? Yes or no? And if it's not, then it fades out and then it turns off the pointer clicks.
So you can't click it anymore. That's a good idea.
And it's just a super simple thing you can put into a project in like a minute, 30 seconds, something like that.
And I think it helps a lot in the long run, right?
And then what I'll do is I'll often make I'll have like a widget extension, and then I'll do something like show if, and then I'll just pipe that into show if. So I can have like, here's my text widget dot show if, like show this text is true, and behind the scenes it's just that animated opacity with the ignore pointer.
I will try that. I think that is a very cool concept. Flutter is evolving. Today, 2 days ago, there was Flutter release 1.17, right? So what would you like to see in the future in Flutter?
Well, I'm glad they decided to implement Metal on iOS 10 and up, I think. So that's pretty exciting. To be honest, though, I thought the performance was fine without it. So I don't know like exactly where we'll notice a difference, but I'm glad that it's there because it provides headroom. So that's always good. In the future, I always say that the best and worst thing about Flutter is Dart. I think Dart is fine, you know. I like to say it's better than JavaScript, and that's coming from somebody. I actually really like JavaScript, but I'd say it's better than JavaScript for what we're doing. So that's good, because people will say like, why isn't Flutter a JavaScript library? And it's like, well, I'm glad it's a Dart library, you know. So but at the same time, we're missing things like, I'm going to get the terminology wrong, method overloading, where you can be like, if this method has string as an argument, then it does one thing. If this method with the same name has a number as an argument, it does a different thing. So that's in Swift, and it's really nice. Also, obviously non-nullable by default, which is coming apparently. We need state classes. Remy shouldn't have to support a feature that should be in Dart already with freezed. Remy's freeze package exists because Dart is failing at providing decent data classes. Thank you, Remy, for making freezed, but I'm sorry you had to make it because Dart was failing you, basically. I don't know. This has always been one of those like longtime fantasies of me for Dart. I wish they would switch the stream API to use observables, but that's such a minor thing. I don't think it's really worth even mentioning. It's just something that I always wished would be kind of the case, because they're getting observable spec in JavaScript core, I believe, pretty soon. Little things with the analyzer. It'd be nice if extensions were global even. I think the extensions should be global, and if they're not global, then they should automatically import when you go to use an extension on something. I believe that's in the pipeline as well. I actually wish that we had better namespacing in Dart. Well, you end up with these files that have like 100 imports in them. And so you can create like a library file that you are importing into all of your projects, and that works fine, but you can't do named exports. So if you have one package, like HTTP uses a class called client, Stream Chat uses a class called client. So you can't have them in the same like library export because you can't have named exports. You can't export HTTP.client. You can't export stream.client. You can only export two conflicting clients, which is ridiculous in my opinion. And this is actually where that method overloading comes into play, because I believe, someone in the comments can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in Swift, if you have two classes both named client and they both have different constructor arguments, it's smart enough to pick the one that you actually want. And also based on like, if you then go to try to consume two different client types, it knows which type is which for like an argument, and it will pick the right one. So, and right now that's just not possible in Dart, because Dart's not smart enough to know how to do that. So it's just little things like that.
Okay, so we are already at our last question. Is there anything that I missed? Do you want to share something with the community?
Okay, so I just want to show some super quick code generation stuff. I think code generation is a great tool for people to start getting comfortable with, because once you start working on larger projects, you start to notice these patterns you keep repeating over and over and over again. And a good example of a pattern like that would be like if you're doing a change notifier class, where you might say something like, okay, we've got this Boolean, a private Boolean is awesome, and then you've got your, see if I haven't been writing, is awesome with some kind of default, right? And then you've got set is awesome. What do we got here? Bool. I always do an E because otherwise it can be actually more confusing to try to handle that stuff. So we'll do is awesome equals E, and then an E is just like element. Usually I'll use that when I'm like mapping something. And then you've got your notify listeners. So that's like a pretty standard way to just get a value that has a default value that you can get safely, and that you can set externally and have it be reactive. Or when you do lots of change notifier classes, you end up writing this block of code over and over again. So then you're like, okay, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could do state field, your bool get is awesome, and then is awesome is true. And then if I hit save, so build runner is doing its thing in the background. Actually, this is a good point. Build runner is great, but when you get into bigger projects, it can actually be pretty slow. So you can see now that this is all implemented. So if I click through to here, in the background, what is generated is private field, is generated the setter. It's generated like an explicit setter because some people don't like the implicit setters for side effects, right? So if you're like, oh, I'm going to set this field, and then it does some side effect, then it's like that's not explicit to everybody. So it also creates an explicit reactive setter. So you can say set is awesome, and then it's got a explicit clear is awesome added to it. So that's just one example, but then we can go even farther and we can say something like, okay, do we want to be able to stage this field? So we're going to click save and we're going to let it build. And what it's doing is it's now adding methods for stage is awesome, commit is awesome, revert is awesome, clear staged is awesome. So what it allows you to do is you can actually stage your fields and you can commit or revert them. And this can be nice when you're dealing with things like forms. So if we go back through, now we've got the stuff that we had before, but then we also have a staged version of this field. We can set the stage version. We can, we've got the explicit setter. We've got an explicit clear. We've got the getter for the stage version. We can revert it. We can commit it. And then we also have a does it have changes field as well. This is a set of things, and there's 1,000 ways to handle this scenario, right? You can do it with view models, with something like built value. There's a lot of ways to handle this, but in this particular code base, we needed some kind of shim to get us this functionality without restructuring everything to use built value and this, that, the other thing. So we were able to add these little methods with code generation, and it sped up our development like crazy. This is just an example of you can use just with this one field and this one stage is true. We were able to get out almost 100 lines, like 80 lines of code. So it's like 80 to 1 code leverage in terms of what you can get out. And this is a pattern that we use all over the app.
Cool.
So that's just an example of like what you can do with internal code generation tools, right? I would just encourage people to start getting a little comfortable with code generation, because it may surprise you how much functionality you can handle with code generation when you might try to look for a package that you're relying on somebody else to maintain for a project that you're trying to deliver, when like a 50-line code generation tool might be just fine. Sure. All right, I'll plug two things. The first one is obviously my employer, Yakka. We specialize in Flutter mobile apps, Vue web apps, and also Golang backends. We do other things as well, but that's kind of our core focus is those projects. And then the other thing I want to plug is actually this really cool language I just ran into the other day. So it's called Mintlang is this really cool front-end language for web apps, and it's got pretty much everything you can think of built in. It's like a meta language. You can think of it as like a meta language for like a complete React app. So under the hood, it's using actually Preact because of the bundle size and a lot of its own kind of code generation. But you can see it has the concept of a component. This would be kind of like a widget. So you got your render, and you can see you got some JS action going on in there on it. And you've got functions. For people who are into Kotlin, you'll notice the fun tag, which is kind of cool. You can do your styles in line with the component. It's like built right into the component. They have data classes built in with shallow equality, and they are serializable classes, and you can change like what the field names are. There's global stores. They actually have a primitive for routes for the application. There's all kinds of stuff. Modules are kind of like classes in a way. And it's just amazing. I've started working with this thing, and the tooling is crazy fast. It uses Crystal for the language server and the tooling and the compilation and all that stuff. And I've just been totally amazed by it. Those are the two things I wanted to plug.
Now there's nothing else to say, then thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
That was amazing. So this was the interview with Luke Pighetti. It was really amazing to hear his Flutter story. And if you enjoyed this video, please give that video a like. On the right side, you find as always the subscribe button, and on top of me, you have the 2 videos that you are more than interested in. If you have any questions or you have someone that you want to get an interview with, please let me know down in the comments below. Till the next time, guys.